This is the Solid Signal Podcast, and the week is September 20th, 2021. Let me take you behind the scenes a little bit. Now, when I decide what I'm going to do for a podcast, it's usually about 24 hours or so before I record it. And then I come up with some ideas, I do some rehearsals, I come up with some notes, I revise. And then once all of that is done, I basically go off the cuff and record kind of what I want to record. I've got some stuff in front of me, and that's how this podcast works. I know other people will write every single word and then read it in that typical podcasty voice. That's not what I do. This is what I do, and so sometimes things wander a little bit. And last night I was thinking about, okay, so I'm going to do another podcast about the Emmys, and I do this with every award show. I talk about, how they're basically the decline of modern civilization and how they stink and how they could be better and how they should be focusing on something else. And I have a feeling you're about as bored with that as I am, which of course completely puts aside the fact that it's true, but not the point. So last night I'm watching the Emmys, and maybe you watched them too, and you probably had thoughts. I had thoughts. Thoughts, some of them don't really belong on this podcast because we're really not political. I do want to say, though, that my thoughts and my sympathies go out to folks in places like Tennessee and West Virginia right now that are struggling with COVID and that couldn't possibly host an event like the Emmys, and how if I were in a room with 500 people and I still felt so incredibly safe, I guess I would have maybe spent a little bit more time showing how grateful I was. But hey, not the point, I suppose. The point is, I wanted to look at what the Emmys was about. And last night's big winners were, The Crown and Ted Lasso, and it was all about streaming, and you expect that. You do. At this point in time, you expect it. That's not new. If I did a new podcast about how, streaming was taking over the world of the Emmys, you'd say, hey, what is this, 2015? And you'd stop listening. So what's the takeaway? What can we really pull out of last night's broadcast that will make for a good podcast this week? And as I was thinking about that, it occurred to me, we need to start looking at broadcast television a little bit differently. Traditionally, we would say that cable and later streaming were able to be successful because they didn't have to be a mass market kind of thing. They could be satisfied with much smaller viewership. And I guess I get that. When the real king of the hill was broadcast TV, broadcasters didn't want to take risks. But now I think that what we're seeing is that not taking risks is beginning to hurt them. It's beginning certainly to affect them in the awards. And let's be honest, the ratings are not ever great anymore. Compared to where they were 25, 30 years ago, ratings are down 90 to 95% for broadcast television. So if I were a broadcast executive and making all that big money, I would be looking in a different direction. I'd be thinking about things a different way. Broadcast television is no longer the mainstream big king of the hill kind of thing. No, mainstream is now Netflix and to some extent some of the other services. But, Netflix with Bridgerton, with The Crown, with The Queen's Gambit, they're owning this, and they've got the viewership numbers to back it up. No, the real disruptor here could be broadcast. I'd say if broadcasters took a small portion of their schedule and used it to take really, really big swings, that all of a sudden they could be back on top again. There's no reason why not. Now, look, there are some things you need to know about broadcast. You can't have certain things on broadcast that you can have on streaming and cable. I'm talking about, the nudity and the profanity and stuff like that. But that's not what makes these shows great. What makes them great is really sharp writing and deep, deep cuts into what makes characters tick. I mean, that's why people like this stuff. And when you've got shows on broadcast that are basically procedural crime dramas, most of them, and the few things that aren't that or reality TV are relatively light duty sitcoms, there's an opportunity. Now, I like light duty sitcoms myself. I actually wish there were more of them, but not the point. The point is, if you're going to turn broadcast TV back into a prestige product, you have to take some big swings, the kind of swings that Netflix can take because, they had 3 programs win Emmys essentially out of, who knows, 1,000 that they came up with in the last year. Sure seems like it. Apple TV hit big with Ted Lasso, but what about the 35 or 40 other original shows that they've had in the last 12 months that nobody is talking about? See, they're willing to take these big swings and see what comes up. And I think broadcast could do the same thing. There was a time that broadcast did that. When they did Roots back in the 70s, that was an incredibly big swing for them. It was socially relevant. It was a miniseries, which by itself was a new thing at the time. It was focused on black folks, which at the time was still pretty rare. And more importantly, it indicted a whole culture for how black folks were treated. Again, very rare stuff. Broadcast TV has got 21 hours a week per network to fill. And honestly, most of the time they're filling it with crime dramas, which I'm not going to say those are lazy because they take a huge amount of work. There's locations and special effects and all sorts of stuff. They're incredibly hard work to do. But when it comes to really innovating, is that what they're doing? No, it probably isn't. Because broadcasters want what sells now. They don't want to take risks. And yet, if they want to stay relevant in the future, maybe they should take risks. What if each broadcast network of the 4 major ones took 1/2 hour, and that's it, 1/2 hour, and did something really innovative with it? I mean, something that has never been seen on broadcast TV, something that was incredibly deep and well written, well done, and just something they could be super proud of and not care so much about the advertisers. Spread the cost among the rest of the 20.5 hours that you're doing. Just do something really, really prestige with 1/2 hour. I think it could really work. I think it could restore the reputation of the broadcast networks because, I mean, let's be straight here. Last night was a slaughter for the broadcast networks. I saw Anthony Anderson for Blackish was nominated, and he didn't win, but I think that was the only nomination that I could see on primetime. And wow, that's the Emmy establishment sending a message, if nothing else is. And I think that the Emmy establishment doesn't always represent the people, but in this case, I think they're right too. Every year, broadcasters make do with a smaller and smaller slice of the pie, and they ask themselves why. And they come up with the same stuff over and over again. They add another FBI and another NCIS and, another singing reality show. And they say, hey, we're doing great. They congratulate themselves for it. And okay, I guess that's what they want to do. But what if they didn't? What if broadcast really could come roaring back? And that's an exciting idea for me because I think when you talk about broadcast television, it's local affiliates, local news, money going into the local economy. That's good. That's what you want. That's what you need. And that's what we need in this country moving forward. So really, it's up to the broadcast networks to do an awful lot to make this happen. You can kind of argue they haven't done enough in the past to do it. And they really should. So there's my challenge. I encourage you, leave some comments on this one. Tell me what you think, because if you think that I'm just way off base and you just want to see another episode of Mark Harmon just kind of staring into the screen, hey, more power to you. And as I said for myself, I'd like to see more mindless sitcoms, but I'd still like to see 1/2 hour per week that was really, really swinging for the fences. Even if I didn't personally like it, if it was super well made, I think that's all that was important. That's it for me for the podcast for this week. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I will talk to you some more next week.